read two stories to you. The king of Egypt said to the Hebrew midwives, one of whom was named Shiphrah and the other Puah, "When you act as midwives to the Hebrew women and see them on the birth stool, if it is a boy, kill him. But if it is a girl, she shall live." But the midwives feared God, and they did not do as the king of Egypt commanded them. But they let the boys live. So the king of Egypt summoned the midwives and said to them, "Why have you done this and allowed the boys to live?" The midwives said to Pharaoh, "Because the Hebrew women are not like the Egyptian women. For they are vigorous, and they give birth before the midwife comes." So God dealt with them, the midwives, and the people multiplied and became very strong. And because the midwives feared God, he gave them families. Then Pharaoh commanded all of his people, "Every boy that is born to the Hebrew you shall throw into the Nile, but you shall let every girl child live." Now a man from the house of Levi went and married a Levite woman. The woman conceived and bore a son. And when she saw that he was a fine baby, she hid him for 3 months. When she could hide him no longer, she got a papyrus basket for him and plastered it with bitumen and pitch. And she put the child in it and placed it among the reeds on the bank of the river. His sister stood at a distance to see what would happen to him. The daughter of Pharaoh came down to bathe at the river while her attendants walked beside the river. She saw the basket among the reeds and sent her maid to bring it. When she opened it, she saw the child. He was crying, and she took pity on him. "This must be one of the Hebrews' children," she said. Then his sister said to Pharaoh's daughter, "Shall I go and get you a nurse from the Hebrew women to nurse the child for you?" Pharaoh's daughter said to her, "Yes." So the girl went and called the child's mother. Pharaoh's daughter said to her, "Take this child and nurse it for me, and I will give you your wages." So the woman, who was the child's mother, took the child and nursed it. When the child grew up, she brought him to Pharaoh's daughter, and she took him as her son. She named him Moses, because she said, "I drew him out of the water." Reading from the Gospel of Matthew. Now after the Magi had left, an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream and said, "Get up and take the child and his mother and flee to Egypt and remain there until I tell you, for Herod is about to search for the child to destroy him." Then Joseph got up and took the child and his mother by night and went to Egypt and remained there until the death of Herod. This was to fulfill what had been spoken by the Lord through the prophet, "Out of Egypt I have called my son." When Herod saw that he had been tricked by the wise men, he was infuriated, and he sent and killed all of the children in and around Bethlehem who were 2 years old or under, according to the time that he had learned from the wise men. This was fulfilled what had been spoken through the prophet Jeremiah. When Herod died, an angel of the Lord suddenly appeared in a dream to Joseph in Egypt and said, "Get up, take the child and his mother, and go to the land of Israel, for those who were seeking the child's life are dead." Thus ends the reading of the word. Now, I have to talk to you a little bit because I need to educate you just a tad about what we do at this time of year, okay? What we do in what's called the liturgical year. And many of you may know this. I would guess that many of you don't know this. The church liturgical year begins in Advent, okay? So the church's new year started on December the 2nd. Now, there are 3 years in the church's liturgical calendar. Say that 5 times fast. 3 years in the church's liturgical calendar. Year A, Year B, and Year C. We are currently in what is known as Year A. In Year A, we work with the Gospel of Matthew. In Year B, we work with the Gospel of Mark. And in Year C, we work with the Gospel of Luke. So what was last year? Year C. So now, this year, we are going to spend all of our time working with Matthew's Gospel. The Gospel according to the one known as Matthew. Now, there may be some of you who think that the Gospels tell the same story, but they don't. Each Gospel is different. Matthew's Gospel is different from Mark. Matthew's Gospel is different from Luke. John's Gospel is different from all 3 of them. But they share some common material. Matthew and Luke are both based on the Gospel of Mark, which was the earliest known manuscript that was used as biblical scripture in the New Testament times. So they used Mark as a source to write their stories. But Matthew has some stuff that's very different. So there was another source where Matthew got material, and that's called the Q source, or the quell source. It means source. So Mark and Q are the 2 pieces of material from which Matthew creates his gospel. The one called Matthew creates his gospel. The belief is that this gospel was written sometime between the year 80 and 100 of the Common Era. Now, if you can guess, that's how many years after the death and resurrection of Jesus? Somebody's very good with this. Somewhere in the neighborhood of 57 years is when Matthew compiled this piece of literature. His community is a Jewish Christian community. It is a community of transition. Most of the people who are adults in Matthew's ecclesia, is the Greek word, in Matthew's church community, community of faith, are people who were adults at the time of the destruction of the Second Temple, which was in the year 70 of the Common Era. Matthew is writing this story looking back in time. There's nobody with a laptop sitting on the Sermon on the Mount taking notes. There is nobody who is there with a papyrus sheet of paper taking notes with a quill pen. All of the written manuscripts come from oral tradition. How many of you are joke tellers? How many of you are good joke tellers? How many of you have gotten the same joke sent to you over and over and over again on the internet? But it's got a little tweak. You know, it's changed, or the context is changed. I get them all the time, but the context gets changed. And, or the characters in the story get changed, but it's the same joke. Oral tradition does that with storytelling. The stories, your fish stories, you know the fish stories.